Hello. Oh, yep, that's working. All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome, tēnā koutou katoa, sewa ngapa, willkommen, and salam alaikum. My name is Sarah Mead, and I'm the co-director of the Climate Litigation Network, who is hosting this wonderful event alongside our Italian partners, ASUD. The side event is to explore the role of climate litigation in creating government accountability. We acknowledge our First Nations people here in the audience and online, and of course, amongst our esteemed panelists. Our event this evening is focused on the demand for government accountability in the face of the climate crisis. Put simply, governments, particularly those in the global north, are imperiling our present and our future. For 30 years, they have promised to address the climate crisis. Yet despite being fully aware of the consequences of delayed climate action, their policies are putting us on track to 2.8 degrees warming by the end of the century. At COP27, little progress has been made so far. But affected communities all over the world are standing up, from Colombia to Canada, Belgium to Brazil, New Zealand to Norway. Affected communities are turning to the courts to challenge their government's climate inaction. What started as one case is now a truly global movement. There are now over 80 cases that have been filed against governments in every corner of the world. And the law is on their side. Dozens of courts have already found that climate action is not a choice, but a legal duty. For the first time this year, the legal teams of those cases have come together in what is called the Climate Trials Campaign. And they had this message in the lead up to COP27. Can we show the video? All right. Yeah.
In 2015,
the world leaders are failing to safeguard our future.
The betrayals are not going unnoticed.
Because all countries have a legal duty to take climate action.
Since the win of the Dutch agenda case in 2015,
more than 70 court cases have been brought against governments.
These climate trials challenge governments on their lack of action to the climate crisis.
This is a new movement, which ensures that governments are held accountable.
Each and every win helps other cases to succeed.
Climate trials push countries to cut emissions and protect human rights. And they prove it to be successful
in the country, around the world.
So governments have a choice. Act now
or face your courts.
Spread the word. Let governments know that they will be held accountable.
So today, we have the pleasure of being joined by 4 of those marvellous plaintiffs behind these cases. And how we will do it is we will each of them will introduce their case and tell us why they've filed their case against their government. And then we'll have a few questions, and then we'll hopefully have some time for those in the audience that want to talk about or introduce a case that they're bringing. And then we're leaving time at the end so that you can meet each other, talk to the lawyers, talk to the plaintiffs, and build this movement further. So may I introduce our wonderful panelists. Our first panelist is Waruam Pabai. He is a Gura Malulgal man and a traditional owner of the island of Boigu. He has lived on Boigu his whole life, and he is the director of the proscribed body corporate that represents the 6 clans on his island. We'll then have Waruampol Kabai. He is also a Gura Malulgal man and a traditional owner on the island of Saibai, and he is a director of the proscribed body corporate, which represents the 7 clans on the island. And they together have brought the landmark case against the Australian federal government. Luisa Neubauer at the end needs no introduction. She is a climate activist from Germany and a leading force for the Fridays for Future movement in Germany, which has brought 1.4 million people out onto the streets to demand stronger climate action. And she's brought a case against the German government. Mike Smith is from my home country, is an iwi leader from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a climate representative for the Iwi Chairs Forum. And he's brought 2 cases, one against the New Zealand government and one against the biggest polluting companies in New Zealand. So I will now hand over to Uncle Pabai to tell us about your case against the Australian government.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. Thank you. Seo nga pa, ngat lak ngal pemura buai turan ngal penia kaimel. La kaya wal mamen ngal pa, kaya bakuta pa. In my respect, my name is Waduam Pabai. I'm from Boigu Island. Boigu Island is located in the Torres Strait. Boigu Island is my homeland. Boigu is a northerly island, low-lying island, surrounded by mangroves. Sand. It's about 5 kilometers offshore of Papua New Guinea. That's my country, my home country. I have population, about 500 people living in my communities. This is why I'm taking this action, this case, to the court to things that we need to be done in my community. The culture protocol is very important. We are the people of the culture. I'm a proud man to say that I know what I'm saying. My culture will not be destroyed. My culture will be stand on my land, to the sea, to the sky. This is why I'm sitting here, to show the world, to the Australian, that who we are. To the brothers and sisters in the Pacific nations, have their own way of approaching their culture and their identities. Who they believe in the indigenous people around the world, that what happens in the common of how the culture is connected to us. in the place and place where our identity. I want to acknowledge and pay my respect to the indigenous people in this room and who are attending COP. My culture is connected me to my ancestors and acknowledge and responsibility that have been passed down from the generation to generation. It is a long thread stretched back 65,000 years, connecting each of my families a member until I am standing here at this point of time. Today, as a Boigu man, I'm standing here with the cultural responsibilities, not only to protect those 65,000 years connected to the country, culture, but only to protect side that been deeply, deeply spiritual, significant to my people and my people from the Western Island of the Torres Strait. The thread that concern me that from the point back through 65,000 years of the years of ancestors. Also wave around the world my kitchen table through my children. My oldest son is about 30 years old, and my youngest daughter is about 25 years old. I normally share my experience to help to kill the thread of the culture. Through the new generation, we come to sit on the table for a dinner. It's a good time when the families come together. When we look to our forefathers' generation, in the past, I saw the whole photo of the villages as well as shown them how Boigu looked like in that time. I showed them the land went down 300 meters from where it is today. Now it's covered by the water. When we look today, the gap is getting closer. I am always saying this to my kids, that I'm standing up a Boigu to show the world who we are and what we are losing. And it is not just for us, it's for all of the community across the world who are suffering and risking losing everything like us. From when I was born, was completely changed. We lost so much land. Our beaches, that through our fresh water, swamps, became salty. We cannot grow our fresh foods anymore. And the food we get from the ocean changing. When I look today, what happened on the lost and what will be lost, I can't believe it. It caused me and my community deep pain. We worried about young generation and what will what will be left for them. For my people, the thread is culture connected to us, to the land, and to my country. We are tied to it and separate from the land, breaking us from our culture and our identities, from who we are. Maybe in 20 years, maybe sooner, our Hosans will be at my front door. I'm a Buigu man. Who I am is connected to my island. My ancestors that let me rest there. If I take Buigu from me, I have nothing left behind. I won't be able to say I'm Buigu man. Buigu-like because I won't be taken by the Hosan. I have nothing. My identity will be gone. My first saying to always this, I will fight to stay here. Don't take me away from here because this is my land. I want my kids and my grandkids and the future generation to know that this is my dad's land, my dad's community, and how he identified himself to us. And it is who I are to be a Buigu-like. I'm a proud good Malurgao nation that I say to them. No matter what happens, if you have country and your culture, you still be proud of yourself. Australian government has the power and control. They know what's happening and they are taking action. That's why I'm bringing our climate cases to say you have the duty of care to protect us, our culture, our families, and our country. I'm happy to be here to deliver this message from my country to the Prime Minister of Australia and the world leaders. I say them, help us. I say to them, the time of politics must stop. You must take action urgently to protect us from climate change. If you don't, we'll lose everything. When I see others around the world taking cases against the government, it's gives me pride about what they are saying and what they are standing together. We are all in the same boat. We are all saying the same things. We'll fight to protect our community from climate change. Thank you very much.
Uncle Paul? Yeah. Okay.
Just an acknowledgement.
Seung Apamura. Welcome everybody. My name is Guy Paul Kabai. I'm Torres Strait Islander and Gudamalugal Nation of Torres Strait. I am a Saibai man. I come from a small island, one of the most northern islands of Australia. On the map, you will find us in Torres Strait, the sea between the tip of Queensland and Papua New Guinea. My island sits only 4 kilometers from Papua New Guinea. It is flat, muddy island. Most of it is covered by swamp. And there is a narrow strip of land on which, on the northern side, that's where we live. And it's about 1.5 meters above sea level. Our homes lines the sea, facing the oceans. The families can see from the verandas. I've come to COP to show the leaders that we exist. I come to say, this is Saibai. And here we are on the map. We exist. We cannot be forgotten. I was born in 1967, and I lived most of my life on Saibai Island. When I was a little kid, about 10, I remember my parents and grandparents telling me that in 1942, most of Saibai Island people have moved from Saibai to tip of Cape York in Australia, Australian mainland. They also told me that the people have moved to mainland because there was drought, inundation, and gardens have been destroyed. No one had realized that there's been a climate change. So we are Khalsa people. No one seems to believe that Mother Nature is taking place. We believe in God. The loss of those community members from Saibai is very fresh cut to our community members today. We are scared that more people might leave the island. The second movement from the island was made in 1970s. They have also moved to the mainland Australia, which the place is called now Saisia. Same problem from drought. And from drought. Some of the people have stayed on the island because they believe that if the ships go underwater, then they will leave. The pain of those who still sits on the community and the generation that have gone after, who have lived on Cape, they are still saying that they are coming back for their mother's land. And I think this is with tears in my eye. Will Saibai continue to exist? And that's a chance for them to come back to their motherland, and or will be forced to leave. When I was a little kid, Saibai was land of plenty. We could catch barramundi crabs in the swamp, and we had a special garden place that way we can go by boat and by canoes. Our parents taught us how to grow taro, cassava, and other vegetables for our families. We used to play on our beaches. It used to be 100 to 150 meters out. We used to play football on the sand. Now it's gone. I used to go out with my parents for a garden place and go by dinghy to our garden. Now it's gone. When I go there, it's destroyed by storm. I can't see garden beds there or anything anymore. The season have changed. When I was younger, I could go hunting with my uncles for dugong and turtle, like in the month of September. Now it's different. The climate pattern has been changed. That's how we know there's climate change here. Now I'm 54 years old. How can I teach my kids to plant taro? Because the ground is all wet. I plant animal bases like taro and cassava. So my kids are now missing on what we used to do because of climate change. We could get dugong and turtle. Now it's all gone. Our garden place, where we could feed our families, now it's all gone. There's nothing to feed our kids. There's nothing left for us to survive because of this global warming. It is very hard to explain this and to talk about it with our next generation. Will they survive or relocate? We don't know. We don't know yet. With water rising, we will still be on Sabai, or we don't know. So I am here to tell the world leaders that our culture and everything is dying because of climate change. Melting and sea levels rising. I am here to make world leaders understand what we're going through. Our livelihood, how we lived before, and what we've lost. We need to show this to the leaders of the world. Show them where we are another group of indigenous people live. Uncle Pabai and I will show them we exist. We are here to put our pin on the paper, on the map, and to say, look at us. We are here. We're thinking. Now we are here. We see everything on TV. That there's climate change and sea level rising. But the government has behaved as if climate change isn't there. If the government stops the coal burning and the gas emission, we'll have a better future for our kids, our children. If they don't stop, we'll be climate change refugees. We'll have to move from our own island, and it will be very sad. We don't want to do that. We need to be born there and to be buried there on our own islands. Otherwise, we'll lose our culture and our tradition. I am proud to be here today with other people who have climate cases against their government. In our case, we want the government to show that they care about us as indigenous people of Australia. Uncle Pabai and I also want our case to help other people in Pacific and around the world because they are thinking too. We know that so many people are hurting like this is our people, like our people on Boigu and Saibai. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Paul and Uncle Pabai. I think we'll turn to Luisa next, and then you, Mike. So Luisa, if you just want to tell us about your case, why you brought it, and what happened to it, that would be wonderful.
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much for having me, and I think after what we just heard, it is very obvious why we need the most polluting countries of the world, the most industrialized, so-called industrialized countries, the global north, to pay and to act. And if we acknowledge that this is not about numbers or pictures of an iceberg on a glacier, but about livelihoods, and it's about peoples, and it's about identities, and it's about homes, then we need to acknowledge that the governmental inaction of countries like mine, like Germany, has no morality in this century. So I am a climate activist. I'm with Fridays for Future in Germany. And in 2019, we started organizing against our governmental inaction. And we organized every single week of an entire year, and every single week we were more people on the street. So at one point we were 1.5 million people on the streets of Germany on a single day, making it the largest climate demonstration ever in the history of the country. And at that point it wasn't just students anymore, but we organized across every sector of societies. There were the churches with us, and there were the hospitals and the kindergartens, there were the schools, there were the teachers, there were the architects, there were online retailers that shut down their web pages at that day to say, today we don't online shop, today we strike. And they went to the streets with us. We had football clubs joining us, and firemen and women. So if you would walk to any of those protests happening at that day in Germany, you would find every person of society you could think of. And it mattered to us that it wasn't just children demanding a future, but it was us saying this is about the present, this is about a society rising up to the moral question of the century, knowing that we are one of the countries most responsible of all in the world. And the very same day that we were 1.5 million people on the street, our government met under Chancellor Merkel back then to figure out a plan to respond to that. And they came up with a climate bill that was commented by one of our leading scientists with the word, "I can't eat as much as I want to throw up reading this." So what do you do when you've organized in every corner of the country, when you've organized in every sector, when you've organized every single class to come together and Democratic Party to agree technically that we need more climate action after having failed for years and years and years to deliver on any of those promises made at such a UN conference? And that was a moment that we felt we need to go to court. And I tell that story about us organizing and mobilizing across the country because we didn't go to court lightheartedly. We didn't go to court because we felt it was the easiest thing to do, but because we severely felt that we had gone every other way. So we bonded with an incredible lawyer in Germany called Rocha, who is behind a number of climate litigation cases. And we went to the Constitutional Court in Germany in the beginning of 2020, suing our government over the very climate bill that we pressured them to commit to in the first case. And we won in front of the Constitutional Court, at least to a degree. At that case, it wasn't just me, it was a number of youth activists. I think to some the case, which is a bit odd to me, is known as a Neubauer case, which is, I'm very glad we don't call it like that in Germany, but I was the lead plaintiff, I guess. And when we won, of course, there were two strange things happening. One is that our own government that we just defeated in the highest court in the country would come to us and applaud, which was a big mistake to make. But the other thing they did is they called it a victory for the climate movement, and whereas it is indeed a big case that I don't think has happened in that way anywhere in the world so far, for me it was a sad day. I find I don't think that any young person in any democracy around the world should have to sue their own government over their climate inaction. And I don't think that anyone should win over their government that was once known internationally at conferences like these to be a climate leader. That tells us, something about our court systems and about the strength of the climate movement, but more than that, it tells us about the failure that we are facing in the centuries when it comes to the places that consider themselves to be leaders, to be defending human rights and values, and to stick to their promises and their commitments they talk about. So that's the case. And what we're seeing right now is that we have the case and we have the right to climate justice, as it says in this very case, but we are seeing a government still blocking climate action, and we're still seeing Germany, the fourth most responsible country for the climate crisis, not committing to what they've been promising, may it be on international loss and damages, may it be on mitigation, on adaptation, on climate finances. We are not delivering despite that inside and outside the country. So I would give it or pass it on to an open question. We have not yet found out how to use what we won in court in a way that even those governments who have such an addiction to fossil fuels will put to a place where they actually deliver.
Thank you, Luisa. And now, Mike, it would be great if you could tell us about your cases in New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'd like to begin by just paying my respects to my fellow panelists here today. It was very profound, considering that our uncles from the Torres Strait Islands are part of one of the oldest continuous cultures that have maintained their way of life for 65,000 years, when other great civilizations have come and gone, and yet they remain. So I suggest, and it's a little bit sad that we can't speak your language, and that thank you for sharing your thoughts in the English language, particularly given how restrictive that is for you explaining the depth of your combined cultural knowledge. I can't imagine that the Torres Strait Islanders, unlike my colleague here, described Germany as being one of the fourth largest contributors to the problem. And on my left here, our uncles have probably contributed next to nothing to climate change. And so I think that we've got a lot to learn from the cultures of the peoples whom have been able to live in peace with the environment and to sustain their civilization over many, 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 many thousands of years and still remain there. So I guess what we do collectively together is we join with you in your struggle to make sure that your children and your great-grandchildren continue to live in harmony and peace on the Torres Strait Islands. It's such a beautiful place. I've never been there, but I watch it on YouTube from time to time, and there's these beautiful YouTube clips of, because I'm a fisherman, I'm a traditional fisherman, and I watch in amazement as the uncles' peoples go out with their spears and just, they catch barramundi and sharks and other fish, just the beauty of the islands. And it really is a paradise. And if we respect and love the earth, these are the paradise places that we must ensure remain forever. And so it's really great that you're here. And thank you for taking the legal action against Australia, one of the great climate criminal nations of the world, I would say, in terms of its coal exports, its coal exportation to India and other nations. So on behalf of us, my people, you are one of the oldest people in the world, but as our ancestors, both yours and mine ancestors, spread out along the chain of islands that is New Guinea and into the Solomons, and then over many thousands of years ventured out into the South Pacific the great navigators that are the descendants of your grandparents and mine. They eventually ended up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is, if you're the oldest people in the world, we're probably the youngest. So maybe we'll refer to you as grandfathers now instead of uncles. And so we owe a responsibility in terms of that familial relationship that we have to protect each other, to protect our elders, and we understand that you're trying to protect us too, the youngest generations. So getting on to the court case, and I just want to reflect on what my colleague here said. I was really interested when she didn't lead out with the court case, but led out with the civil actions and activism that they've been taking as young people within Germany to challenge the inertia within the state of Germany and the German government. Because like my colleague here, I didn't start off as a litigant or as a plaintiff, but rather I come from an activist background. And we consider that a legal strategy is one part of a raft of strategies that we need to implement in terms of our efforts to contain the climate emergency and to increase the ambition of our governments. There are two things, in my opinion, that are hindering global progress. One of them is the vested interests of the extractive industries and the power that they have to influence world governments, bodies like the UN, and their lobbying power. That is a major constraint to climate action. And the other constraint is the fear that politicians have of a backlash from the voting public if the policies and regulations that they bring to bear in their countries to mitigate and to reduce emissions, once that starts getting a little bit hard on people, well, they fear a political backlash so that they're not prepared to push. So it's in that absence of action, we need some mechanisms to force governments to go a little bit further, and the legal strategy is one of those things. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've got plenty of lawyer friends. I used to manage a community law service that provided pro bono legal services to my Māori community. We kind of did something interesting there. We transitioned away from law into independent disputes processes invoking customary law, but we believe we live in a pluralist society due to a treaty that we have which laid down the foundations of our nation state that promised us that our customary law would be able to be maintained. So basically what we're doing is, what I'm doing is enabling my legal friends to take the cases that they want to take before the courts because they can't be their own clients, right? Some of you are obviously lawyers in the room, so you no doubt are all sitting there itching to get your tooth and claw into the courts and to prosecute some legal cases, but you can't do it in your own name. You can't be your own client. And so I'm the sacrificial lamb, if you like, that put my hand up and said, yes, I'll enable you to run your arguments in court. And if I have costs found against me and I'm bankrupted and driven into penury, I'm fully expecting that you will stand up and pay the reparations. And so I guess that's my relationship in that I don't see myself as a sacrificial lamb. I consider myself an activist who is willing to put everything on the line, including empowering and enabling the legal profession in our country and those lawyers, activist lawyers, to prosecute the types of cases and put forward the arguments that they think have merit. I'm just going to give you a summary of where our cases are at. And so if you want to look up the cases, it's Smith versus the Attorney General, which is a claim against the Attorney General as the representative of the Crown. Now, the basis of the claim is a breach of a novel public law duty said to require the government to protect New Zealand, and in particular my people, Māori. They have a special duty and responsibility towards us to afford us protection, and we're saying that they're in breach of that from dangerous climate change. We say that the government has breached this duty also by both positive actions that have resulted in emissions, including the government's own release of emissions, its own emissions it's responsible for, and also its failure to exercise its governmental powers to stop emissions. Unfortunately, we've had a right-wing government that was in power for 3 terms, and so we're probably about 20 or 30 years behind the rest of the world in terms of our legislative and regulatory framework to control emissions. So we're desperately trying to play catch-up at the moment. We're also arguing breach of obligations associated with the Treaty of Waitangi that I mentioned before, which established the constitutional framework of our country. We're arguing breach of rights to life and as to the ability of minorities to practice their religion. Our religion, like law is not the highest form of authority in our world. The highest form of authority is the law of nature. The second, that's the overall arching, almost constitutional framework, is nature. Subservient to that is the law of human relations, and that's where the law, plays its part, I guess. And lastly, it's the law of the land. And what we mean by that is that it's the manifestation of the resources within our country, which is the third form of law that underpins our society, and that's akin to the economy. So we say law of nature, law of humans, and the economic relationships we have with the land. Unfortunately, within a Western paradigm, that's completely flipped on its head, and it's economics that set the general tone for how politics will work. Politics is in the middle, and what's happened to the spiritual association with nature or the law of nature, we don't know. We think that that's just kicked to the curb in the interests of the hegemony of the capitalist economic system, and that's a complete abuse. And we say the right to our religion is that right to reverse that back to that fundamental concept that we believe all of our ancient peoples had in common, indigenous or not. If you go back into your ancestral histories, you will find that your ancestral people lived in a very close relationship to the law of nature, and so we must return to that. So we're also seeking declarations that the government has breached these obligations and that it will continue to be in breach unless it takes various steps to cause a reduction in emissions. Now, this claim was struck out in the High Court, which means that the court considered the claim to be legally untenable without the need to hear any evidence. So we've appealed to the Court of Appeal, and that's likely to be heard in mid-2023. However, we're cautiously optimistic because we believe that the law is dragged kicking and screaming along behind public sentiment, and that what we need to do is campaign. And I like what you said before. Our sister from Germany talked about that these issues are moral issues. They're not just legal issues. So we must raise the flag of morality in our communities, because as we've seen with various other human rights, like gay rights, like women's rights, it's when the morality of the people shift that the law gets dragged along behind it. And so because the law, in order to be relevant, must reflect the morality of the society it's in at any given time. Sometimes it leads, quite often it follows, but we have a civil responsibility to provide that sort of moral movement through society. I've got another case I'll just speak quickly to, which is a case against, it's called Smith versus Fonterra, and it's a case against the 7 major emitters and fossil fuel retailers and suppliers. The basis of the claim is the tort of public nuisance. A tort is a private wrong for those that come from other legal jurisdictions. The tort of negligence, a novel tort based on strict liability for contributions to dangerous anthropogenic climate change. We're seeking injunctions requiring the defendants to cease emitting or to reduce their emissions over time. Interestingly enough, the High Court judge says to me, "What sort of damages are you seeking, Mr. Smith?" I said this is not a legal case where we're seeking damages. What we're seeking is action on behalf of the companies to reduce their emissions. We don't want compensation for the wrong that they're doing. We just want them to end it, and we'll settle for that. Thank you very much. So this was struck out in part in the High Court because of the cause of action based on novel tort was not struck out, so that's still live. It was struck out in its entirety in the Court of Appeal, and it was appealed to the Supreme Court. And the case was heard in August just past, and we're expecting a judgment in the first half of 2023. If the appeal succeeds, some or all of the claim will be allowed to go to trial, meaning that evidence will be called and witnesses cross-examined as we attempt to prove my case on the facts. If the appeal fails, that will be the end of the case, as there is no further appeal. But it's important for us to, because we don't feel like, we'd like to think, as you said, that a legal case could be a silver bullet, and that if we fired that silver bullet, all things would change. But it's not. But it can be part of a sort of silver buckshot approach, whereby we're applying multiple streams of pressure within society. So look, thanks very much for those of you within the legal profession that are here today, or those from civil society that would seek to support these. I think overall we've got to just keep raising awareness so that that shift in the morality or the consciousness of our communities rises. We must organise and harness the power that comes from that and manifest that in various ways and demonstrate that to politicians, and we must do that by action. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, all of you, for some really comprehensive discussions, introductions, backgrounds, motivations for your litigation. Luisa, did you want to say something quickly? No. I'm going to ask just one quick question, because so many of our questions have been answered in the introduction by our panelists, and then I'm going to leave a little time for anybody to introduce another case that they're bringing, and then there'll be time at the end if you want to introduce yourself to our plaintiffs or the lawyers in the room to see where we can take this movement further. But I wanted to ask Uncle Paul and Uncle Pabai just briefly, and maybe Mike and Luisa, you also want to reflect on this, how your identity, how this case can help you protect country and your culture.
Thank you, Sarah. That is very, very good questions. I did say on my statement before, back to the generations, as we say that we are the people of the culture, we do identify ourselves as what we are. If I'm saying this through to the government, saying that they will heard the culture protocols, but they don't know what the background of the meaning for that. Because we, the indigenous people, we do know what is the real meaning of that. This is why we know that it's been passed on from the generation to generation from our ancestors to be back through 65,000 years. And this is how we connected to our cultural protocols in relation to the land where you were born to.
Thank you, Uncle Pabai. Mike, did you want to speak about the role of your identity or culture in your case? The relevance?
Yeah, only just to reiterate that that framework of what we call mana, and the highest form of mana or authority is not ourselves. And that's one of the conceits of human beings, that we consider that we have jurisdiction and we have the mana over nature. and that it's up to us to extract, to exploit, and to debase and defile the sacredness of the relationship with nature. And so that's how we feel, and that's what's passed down to us from generations of our ancestors, extending back across to the Pacific, back to our grandfathers here. And what I'd say is that when you come from a small island in the Pacific, you can't just willy-nilly exploit and extract all the resources out of that, otherwise you'd be gone in a minute. So our cultures have devised highly sophisticated ways of managing resources to ensure that there will always be something for your children and your grandchildren. And so I think it's these customs and these cultural traditions that our grandfathers, our uncles are speaking about here that are part of the wisdom of, that quite often gets overlooked, that gets relegated to the side, that we consider the sophistication of the Western consumer lifestyle to be far superior. And yet it is that Western lifestyle that in 200 years have taken us almost to the point of destruction. That's how corrosive, that's how incorrect, that's how wrong it is. And so we're lucky to have practitioners of and knowledge keepers and wisdom keepers are still amongst us who can share with us how you live in harmony with your environment. And I know it's an ongoing battle. I have an ongoing battle with my own children, my sons. I've got 7 sons and 2 daughters. And they're all affected by the television and the internet. And they all want the bling, bling, ka-ching, ching lifestyles. And so it's kind of difficult to say to them, look, that's not the way that we should be going. We need to be looking at a whole different way of organising ourselves and living in harmony with the earth. And you've only got to go back to our grandparents and our great-grandparents to see the ways in which they did that. And interestingly enough, some of the most happiest people I've ever seen in my life are people that live in the upper regions of the Amazon who don't have very much in terms of a material culture that's based on plastic or metal or any of those things. And yet they're just, completely happy with their families, their husbands, their wives, their children together, living in harmony and living a happy, fulfilling, successful life without, the overconsumption. And finally, I'd just like to say that I think climate change, fundamentally, the issue is one of selfishness and greed. That's what lies at the heart of climate change, the climate crisis, the climate emergency. It's a selfishness and it's greed. And these are problems cannot be solved scientifically. There is not a scientific solution to selfishness and greed. These are moral and cultural issues that we must resolve. We won't resolve these in the courts. We won't resolve these in the laboratories. We have to resolve them in terms of our relationships with each other and our relationships to nature. Kia ora.
Thank you. And Luisa, as a youth, as a member of a global youth movement, how that has informed your climate activism and your decision to go to court, and maybe also you can touch on the decision and the relevance of
it's very interesting because I think that's a language that we hear a lot in these UN spaces. They speak of developed and developing nations, and just being on this panel, I think, exemplifies so much how that's not working out, because when we speak of culture, I think Germany is a developing nation in the sense that I don't think there's a wide understanding that something could be at stake that we cannot just rebuild. We're building everything, we're engineering stuff. That's what we do. That's a lot of what people identify around, and I don't think there is a understanding that echoes anything we've heard today about that things are getting lost, have been lost already, that will be lost forever. And in a country that is, in a country like Germany, that might not be an entire language, but this is, things you have to look out for more carefully, but they are there. And I mean, we have examples that are quite would say, quite telling as well. We had a flood last year in Germany. It was one of the first, like, very, the climate disaster, so-called, where more than 130 people died. And I think what shocked parts of society more than the actual catastrophes were scientists later saying, don't rebuild, because it will get lost anyhow. There is an entire region that people call their homes, that families call their home, that where people grew and built all that we call our German wealth, which is so important to so many people, and that area is lost. There won't be a future for their children at that very particular area in one of the most richest parts of the world and one of the most privileged parts of the planet. That is when we understand that no place is safe anymore, no culture is safe anymore, some more than others, but nothing is safe in this catastrophe that we're in. And I think that is something that, where the understanding in places like Germany has to very much develop for a while. Just to speak of the court case, because I thought it was interesting how we approached our cases. When we decided to go to the Constitutional Court in Germany, we had to find something that the climate crisis would do to people like me, privileged white Europeans in one of the privileged parts of the world, that could, go against our constitution. And it was really tricky to find this out. And eventually, we went to court with a group of siblings that live on a low-lying island on the coast of Germany that have a farm there that they should inherit at some point. And we argued at the court that their farm would be useless to them because the soil would be too salty. So we went all crazy ways to just say the climate crisis is a danger, please do something. And it felt very German looking back, finding out this very bureaucratic approach to the most existential threat of the century. But it was the court eventually that twisted that around, because the court didn't care about the salty soil. The court came out and said, look, it's about your freedom. It's about your fundamental right to safety. And as young people, we shall have the same freedoms when we are 60 years old as the people that are 60 years old today already enjoy. But that is not working out if we are reducing on our freedoms disaster by disaster. So eventually it's a catastrophe that rules and not a government. And that is how our Constitutional Court, I would say, brought in the cultural identity part to that way more than we did. But I would also say that when we hear about the struggles from around the world around getting courts to protect identities and cultures, we also understand how much we have to think about reforming legal systems and equip them so they can actually deal with the climate crisis. As we see, it is highly insufficient to work out for the very basics of our human living on Earth. Obviously.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you, all of you, for speaking about your cases and the role of identity in them. I think it's fantastic to hear all the different perspectives. We want to give a moment also to turn also to all of the other cases that are happening in the world that are not represented by these four amazing, courageous plaintiffs. And before we do so, we're just going to have a short video, hopefully, from our co-hosts, Sud, who are bringing a case alongside hundreds of Italian residents against the Italian government. So let's see how we go.
Thanks for your participation in presence and online in this special event. With the Climate Litigation Network, we co-organize this event as we believe it is important to occupy space and time within international governance appointments such as COPs to reassert the power of climate litigation in advancing climate justice, and in particular in making our governments accountable and positively influence their climate action ambition. This is why my organization, ASUD, has signed up the Climate Trials campaign towards COP27, and this is why, years ago, we decided to build a climate litigation against the Italian state for its climate inaction. In 2019, we built a national campaign called Giudizio Universale, the Last Judgment, around which we mobilize organizations and grassroots engaged for environmental and climate justice around the country to make the legal action the more participative as possible in a country where class action does not exist. And we succeeded with over 200 plaintiffs, 100 promoting organizations, and 20,000 supporters. Our climate litigation is currently undergoing and asks the Civil Court of Rome to pronounce itself on two main demands. First, to declare the Italian state responsible for failing to address the climate emergency and thus threatening the protection of fundamental human rights. And secondly, to order the state to reduce greenhouse gas emission adequately to its fair share or other levels that the judge would identify. To reduce its fair share of emission means to reduce them adequately to Italy's historical responsibility and its financial and technological capacity. By joining all the current scientific methodologies to calculate fair share, Climate Analytics calculated that Italian fair share implies to reduce Italy's emission by 92% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. An impressive number that helps us to underline how much our state action is delayed and inadequate to the Paris Agreement in respect with the principle of equity and common but shared responsibility, for which main emitters as Italy should be the first actors engaging in radical change. I wish I could have been with you today to share and exchange in person about the groundbreaking initiatives that will be presented now by our great speakers. And I wish you all a fantastic panel.
Thank you, Lucy, in absentia online. And I was going to hand now over to Lucy, my colleague from the Climate Litigation Network, to tell us about quickly one case, the Swiss case that's going to the European Court of Human Rights by our colleagues Klimasini Orinen in Switzerland, supported by Greenpeace International. And then I'm going to also hand over to Javier, who we have in the audience, our fantastic colleague from AIDA, who's going to tell us about the cases that are happening in Latin America. If there's anyone else in the audience that wants to tell us very briefly about a case that they're bringing, please do so, and then we'll break so that we have time at the end so you can all move around, talk to each other, inspire each other, and we can, we can keep moving forward. So, Lucy.
Fantastic. It's great to have... Oh, speak up, stand up. Okay, wonderful. It's fantastic to see so many people here today to hear the stories of the courageous plaintiffs who are bringing their climate cases against governments around the world. We also wanted to spotlight a number of the other stories of plaintiffs who are bringing cases who couldn't be here in COP. We've heard about climate cases on behalf of brought by young people, brought by First Nations people, Indigenous leaders. Another group that are severely impacted by the climate crisis are elderly people. And there's a case that's being brought by a group of 2,000 elderly Swiss women who are bringing a case against the Swiss government. That case has gone through the national courts. They've talked about the health impacts that elderly women experience as a result of heat waves in Switzerland. The national court case didn't succeed, but they are persisting courageously on with their demands for climate justice and now have brought their case to the European Court of Human Rights. That case has been expedited. The court, in doing so, acknowledges how urgent and pressing the demand is, and it's been accelerated to the highest level of the European Court of Human Rights, the Grand Chamber, and there will be a hearing next year. So I think that's yet another example of communities of people who never saw themselves as activists that would turn to a court, but it's the last resort for them in terms of their demands for climate justice for Switzerland to do its part as a wealthy country to increase its mitigation action, which falls so far short of what science says is necessary. We have Korean youth climate activists who are bringing a case against the Korean government. That's before the Constitutional Court. There are young people in Peru and Colombia and Brazil, which I'm sure Javier will talk about. There are communities, as we've heard, in Belgium, in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Germany, in the United States, in Canada, in the UK. all around the world. Young people, older people, people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, community activists are saying enough is enough. States must act, they must follow the science, and they're turning to the courts. So it's a movement that we all need to support, and let's hope that this event is one of those moments where people connect and meet each other and then go onward together. So I'll hand over to Javier to hear about the South American cases.
Thank you. Good evening. Yeah. First of all, congratulations, Lucy and Sarah, on the amazing work of the Climate Litigation Network. And of course, thanks to the panelists who shared their experiences with us, the struggle for climate justice, which is also happening in Latin America. My name is Javier Dávalos. I coordinate the climate program at AIDA, the Inter-American Association for Environmental Defense. And during the last years, we have been mapping and supporting some of the cases that are using climate arguments from international law, from national legislation, to defend the rights of the people in Latin America and also the ecosystems. And of course, ask for more ambition in our NDCs and to stop the projects that are not supporting the just transition that we need. I can just mention a couple of cases. Lucy just talked about Brazil. This country has known huge development in climate litigation. Youth people in Brazil established case asking the judges to stop the government to lie about the updated NDC, which changed the scenario, and it didn't comply with the idea of progression of NDCs, but did the contrary. Also in Ecuador, we supported a case where 9 girls in the Amazon rainforest asked the government to stop authorizing gas flaring in oil fields in the Amazon that were polluting, causing climate change, and affecting their health. Those are only 2 examples of the importance of climate litigation in Latin America during these days. AIDA developed a platform to reunite the cases and being able to share this information in Spanish, which is also very important for our region to have some of the most important cases of Latin America in our own language. And the work in network is really important. So I really wanted to congratulate you again and to keep this global movement for climate justice and using the climate trials as a tool for the change that we need. Thank you very much.
And is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak briefly about a case against a government? Yeah, Mike? Yeah, sorry. The gentleman here on the right, well, you're, yeah.
Hello, my name is Jusei Asuka from Tohoku University in Japan. I want to introduce 4 cases in Japan tackling climate change, and 3 against coal-fired power plant and 1 against government. And first suit against coal-fired plant, I was plaintiff and I lost. So, but anyway, it's for 3 cases undergoing, and we will see the final result next year. And of course, it's not so easy, but I'm happy to see these kind of people working on this issue, and I want to know more about what is happening. Also, I want to cooperate with you and try to make climate justice happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And I think there was one person at the back. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please.
Kia ora tātou. My name's Phil McCabe. Mike just nodded to me and pointing at me, saying, I'm going, I don't have a case going. But there is kind of a case that applies to all of us in the common heritage of humankind and in the high seas and on deep sea mining. The UN mandated organisation called the International Seabed Authority, based in Kingston, Jamaica, is acting on behalf of humankind, and they're about to open the largest mining site that the world's ever seen. with an enormous raft of impacts that would come from that, including climate related. So I'm not sure why Mike pointed to me, but maybe we should all. I mean, AIDA is participating at the ISA as well, yeah, that's going on. Just so you know.
Kia ora, thank you. I think that also points to the very many different layers at which we have to tackle government accountability. It's at the national level, it's at the regional level, it's at the international level, and our Pacific brothers and sisters are bringing a very important request to the General Assembly as well for an advisory opinion on states' obligations in relation to climate change. And we also have someone here.
Eduardo Mosqueda from Mexico.
Welcome.
The next year, we will submit a suit against the Mexican government and for the thermoelectric, for the biggest thermoelectric in Mexico, and because we don't have any access to information, as Escazú agreement recently gives the standard. We don't have any source of which pollutants, which quantity of pollutants, and how these affect people. Also, we will submit this lawsuit because we will try to get energy transition, because the Mexican government have the duty to do a measurement between the sources and elect the best. And in this measure, they have to understand what is the impact on climate change, on humans' health, and on environment's health. So we will begin this journey. Will be difficult, maybe, and as Javi said from NAIDA, only as a network we could be more successful. So I want to introduce myself, and maybe at the end of this fabulous meeting, thank you for all your experience. I will solicit your information to keep in touch, and maybe, for example, to give amicus curiae or communications from your peoples to the judge in Mexico, because the judge in Latin America, as Javi said, as Javi knows, and I don't know who else from Latin America is here, they are not really committed, or they don't have too much experience and knowledge about climate and environmental law. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we had one more in the audience. Okay, yeah, in the middle there.
Yeah, we have a couple of cases in Pakistan. One is we're trying to get the courts to force the government to change the environmental quality standards because they fall below the WHO's standards, the WHO's, and they do so because the WHO has only recommended limits for some of the countries, and Pakistan has been availing of that for a long time, and the government does nothing on it, the EPA does nothing on it. There's another which we are planning, which is almost there, and it's taking, because coal fire plants now have a new lease of life in Pakistan, principally because they're excused from competing on least cost and environmental basis. They're just pushed through by the government. And so the only way to tackle them is to go after them, to make it really hard for them to operate, to raise up costs. So we're going to try and say that you need more and more and more mitigation on your water and how you dispose of your coal ash and stuff. But there's a point of caution that I wanted to raise. It's just, I don't want to dampen the spirit, but one huge problem we're facing, and this is also a question in part to Mike, is that you've seen what happens with, you have to first go through 4 layers, and then you go to evidence, and if you get stopped at anywhere along the line, you're already in trouble, then you're done for. Now, in a country like Pakistan, if you get stopped anywhere on that tree as you climb up, that's it. It dampens everyone's spirit, movements fall apart, and nobody has the gas anymore. It's effectively like a death knell. So using the courts is very tricky business. And this is kind of why we're going through these routes and not tackling a larger question where the court might say, no, there is no duty to protect in this case at all. And I sort of want to ask also, what would you advise to places where judges are, exactly as pointed out, not so well-versed and are very sympathetic towards industry? And, in fact, they do not serve as a good source to counter government inaction at all. What do you say for those cases too?
I'm going to, if I may, say that Mike can answer, or any of our panelists can answer that question after, because we only have 5 more minutes and there's a gentleman behind you that would like to say a quick word about his case. And then I'll let you all free and you can talk to each other and inspire.
Thank you. I'm not talking about the case. I just have a question that I would like if any of the panelists or any people here can present. It's basically litigation when it happens against the parent company while its subsidiary in the developing countries is committing the crime. Because the problem, we have seen that in many cases, is that to litigate the parent company, you have to be the citizen of the country that this company is operating. And not all countries, especially in the global south, have efficient, impartial judiciary system. So if you have any cases that you can share, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
There are definitely people in the room that can answer that question for you, and I can point you to them after. But as we're going to be kicked out of the room briefly, I'm going to conclude to leave you all time to ask whatever question you want. We have heard today from cases, just in this room, we have heard about cases from Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Germany, Switzerland, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico, Japan, Pakistan. These are all cases that are sending the same message that we need government accountability for climate inaction. They are different, they have different legal strategies, they have different people behind them who are facing different climate impacts, but they're all ultimately asking governments just to do their job, just to protect ordinary people from climate impacts. They know that they need to do more, and we're using the law as one tool, one imperfect tool, to ask them to take more action before it's too late. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists. I can't thank them enough for being here, but also for going through the struggle of bringing the cases that you're bringing. As a lawyer, and many lawyers in the room, we know that that is an arduous, painful, time-consuming process. I mean, I think I can speak, I know these 3 here have traveled literally more than halfway around the world, and taken them over 30 hours to come from the Pacific region to join us today to send a really simple message that they really shouldn't have to be sending. So thank you for your climate activism. We're behind you, the world is behind you, and we wish you all the very best with the cases that are ongoing. I will now just say, watch this space with the Climate Trials campaign. Please come together, tell us who you are, tell us how we can help you. And on behalf of ASUD as well, we thank you for being here today, and we wish you safe travels home, wherever that will be tomorrow.